Hi, this is David Davis from ActualTech Media. We're here at VMworld. We are streaming live, excited to be here, and I'm joined by Mr. Gregg Holzrichter. He's the Chief Marketing Officer, the CMO at Big Switch Networks. How you doing, Gregg?
Glad to be here, David.
Absolutely. Thanks for being on. We've been talking a lot about Big Switch. It's been a really exciting VMworld. So much of it is focused now on not virtualization, but networking, software-defined networking in particular. And I know that's where Big Switch plays, and so that's why I think this is going to be a really great story, not just for me, but for the audience out there. So, why don't we kick it off? Tell me a little bit about who you are and your background.
Absolutely. Glad to be here, by the way. This is my 11th VMworld, and partly the reason I've been to so many was that I was at VMware back in 2005 for about 5 years. Kind of ramped up the marketing organization there in a really dynamic time. And then kind of went over to startup land. And so this is my 4th startup now. I did a couple of startups in the software-defined storage space, Versto for a couple of years to help bring sort of innovation to software-defined storage. And we were acquired by VMware to inform vSAN, which is now their vSAN's file system and snapshots and clones. And that was a great sort of exit.
Yeah.
Atlantis Computing was the next on the line, and we kind of had a nice move from VDI storage over into general virtualization. Mm-hmm. But then I was approached by Big Switch, and the more I looked at the opportunity, the more I was intrigued, because really there hasn't been as much change in the networking silo mm-hmm. as there has been to storage and compute. And so this whole vision of the software-defined data center, I think, is missing a core component, which is innovation and agility in that networking space. And so I made the jump, and it'll be 3 years in December, and happy to say that it's really been a great trajectory, a lot of growth, and we're bringing a lot of disruption to that networking stack.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, the more I learn about Big Switch, the more I'm intrigued by what you all do. So, maybe you could tell us just a little bit about the history of Big Switch.
Sure. So, SDN came out of Stanford as a couple of research projects, and it spun off 2 specific SDN startups, Nicira and Big Switch, and those were the 2 early high flyers back in 2010. So fast forward to 2012, and VMware scoops up Nicira for a cool $1.2 billion, and it was sort of the software-defined shot heard around the valley. And at the time, Big Switch was actually a network overlay similar to Nicira, now NSX. And so, in true Valley tradition, the company had to make a tough decision. And as a startup, do we want to go and compete against NSX forevermore, or take a different turn and do a strategic pivot? Very hard to do, but that's what we accomplished. And so back in 2012, when we were doing this pivot, the engineers went and visited Google and Facebook and looked what these hyperscale data centers were doing, and they weren't doing networking in the traditional way. They weren't going to Cisco and buying a full stack. They were going straight to Taiwan and buying boatloads of white box switches. They developed their own centralized controllers, and as a result, they are incredibly efficient. They have, one network admin manages 1,000+ switches. And so that was the inspiration for Big Switch to re-architect the solution instead of being a network overlay like an NSX or a Nuage or a Contrail, and actually instead become an SDN underlay. So an actual fabric, which is sort of a leaf spine cloth architecture, very kind of standard networking approach, but deployed as a fabric with an SDN controller. And so why would you use this type of thing is that it allows any organization to get that sort of order of magnitude improvement in efficiency that a Google and a Facebook does, but you don't have to be that big, and you don't have to hire a bunch of PhD, network engineers. You can just buy off-the-shelf software. Now, our software runs on top of industry standard equipment from the likes of EdgeCore, if you want a white box variant, Dell EMC, and as of last week, HPE Altoline.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Big Switch is software-defined networking. It runs on commodity-based switches, and then there's a software-based component as well, a controller for these switches. So, somebody out there who, let's say they just have their traditional Cisco routers and switches, they're considering software-defined networking for the future, maybe greater security, microsegmentation, maybe just even lowering costs, what do they need to know about Big Switch? How is it going to help them?
Yeah, so Big Switch has two different solutions, so it's an interesting portfolio in that we have next generation data center switching, which is the Big Cloud Fabric. And this is sort of an open alternative to a Cisco ACI or an Arista Cloud Vision. It's very scale out, and basically you have this concept of turning on an SDN controller. It's an appliance for larger scale pods. Once you turn that on, you feed it MAC addresses for your leaf and spine switches, and then it automatically downloads a small package of software, which is your network operating system, which reports back to the controller. So the bring up is automatic. It takes about 15 minutes. And once you do that, you're managing everything through this single pane of glass, and your whole pod acts as if it was one big switch, thus the name. And so the why you would do that is because from that time forward, you're not actually banging off around on a CLI on a switch by switch basis. You actually have very intuitive graphics, dashboards, and you can see pod wide. So this could be up to, in some of our largest customers like Verizon, 128 leaf switches managed by a single controller. And so imagine the thousands of VMs that are contained in a 60 plus rack pod. And this is the same model that Google and Facebook manage. You don't have an entire data center as your failure domain, but you rather have pods. And so, a pod in our case is about 60 racks. Once you consume your 60, then you stand up another, and then you have sort of data center interconnect to connect a bunch of the different pods. So basically what we're trying to do is bring the easy button of networking, and instead of having network engineers who are very, very sort of well-trained CCIEs, network generalists can now actually manage some of these different solutions. And in fact, one of the ways that we describe it is networking at the speed of virtualization. And we mean that because the workflow in vCenter, there's actually a tab. So our single SDN controller ties up into the vCenter through an API and actually has a tab in vCenter that allows a vAdmin who's working in vCenter every day to instantiate a VM, provision your software-defined storage. And today in most organizations, you need to sort of come to a screeching halt and file a NetOps ticket and wait for the VM to actually get pushed into your live production environment. And in our case, you can pre-configure. You have the network team speak with the virtualization team, and you sort of pre-authorize using role-based access control the vAdmin to be able to instantiate, provision, and push all in one work stream. So it's kind of that vision of the software-defined data center delivered.
Wow, so it gives the business a lot of greater agility, so they can bring up these new applications, new VMs faster, makes them more efficient. They don't have to wait for the networking group to bring up the network configuration. And so it's similar in some ways to NSX, with the benefits being similar there. I mean, I've been learning a lot about NSX here. I know, like Pat Gelsinger said, NSX is for VMware what NSX is for VMware for the next 10 years what ESX was for the last 10 years. So Big Switch isn't an NSX competitor because you all are an underlay. Yep. But I think it's an area, at least in my learning about NSX, that's often forgotten. It's like, well, here's the NSX network, and then it just connects to the physical network, and boom, it's left off the diagram. So why is that so important? Why is the underlay so important?
Yeah, and I think that we really actually partner very well with NSX, and in fact, it's one of the big pushes that we have this year, along with our partners VMware and Dell. And so, the importance of a physical network, and one of the challenges with NSX today is that if there is a network performance challenge, is it the virtual network's fault? Is it the physical network's fault? And you can't see end to end. And so NSX BU has invited Big Switch into their VTEP integration program, which is the termination of your virtual tunnels into the physical network. And so what that gives you is end-to-end visibility, and you can do troubleshooting. So you need to have a physical underlay to deploy NSX, and why not have a physical underlay that has great integration and can be deployed on industry standard layer 2, layer 3 switching, as opposed to an expensive proprietary flavor.
Right. So the overlay and the underlay really complete the SDN picture. It's not complete without both.
I agree. Yeah, that's right. And I think that NSX brings differentiation and the microsegmentation, kind of value add, and we instantiate that on the layer 2, layer 3 physical network, as well as deliver automation.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And so I know you said you scale up to a massive, incredible number, hyperscale. But what about the SMB or smaller companies? Could Big Switch help them too?
Yeah, it's in fact many organizations, especially outside of North America, when we get into some of the Asian countries that we operate in, it's difficult to find CCIEs, and so many of the SMB companies are really excited to have this next generation approach to doing networking, and you can start with as small as a single rack, a single top of rack switch, and so the ease of management is really very different. We have an API, so it's an API first architecture. We have a CLI for those who actually are more comfortable or want to do more advanced commands, but we have a very intuitive UI that has built-in analytics that are drillable, that you can actually see representations of all of the different components, whether that's your SDN controller, your spine switches, your leaf switches, down to actual individual VMs, and actually down to individual containers. So you have this representation of cables connecting. You have everything that's very visual, which the human brain is kind of geared for.
Right.
And so if there's outage, there's a little red blinking light, and you can understand exactly which port or which switch without walking down through the data center hallways. So it's just a very easy. We're trying to be the easy button of networking. And really, our kind of goal is to actually have the software run on a variety of different platforms. So today it's EdgeCore, Dell, and HPE. But similar to VMware, 15 years ago, a lot of these x86 players ended up partnering with VMware because you had this very smart software layer and server consolidation, and we all know the story. But we hope to do the same thing now for networking, where we can actually port our software over to Lenovo or NEC or Huawei or others, and therefore bring more innovation. As a small startup, we have about 180 people, but being able to have hundreds of salespeople from Dell or hundreds of salespeople from HPE talking about doing networking in a different way, we really think that that's an opportunity, in addition to partnering with VMware and the likes of Red Hat as well.
Right. Yeah, I mean, virtualization made the compute much more efficient, and now it's the network's turn, really, to become more efficient.
We were looking at some data, and we just finished our fiscal year, and are pleased that we grew over 100%.
Wow.
And I think we're getting out of that really, really early adopter phase into that kind of early majority in the whole crossing the chasm kind of paradigm. And I think that with over 200 customers, and very large customers and small customers, service providers who are now using this for sort of NFV, as well as data center operators, we often start with a monitoring fabric, which is one of our products that can go in and actually monitor your existing Cisco environment. So one of the things I've been really surprised by is the account control that Cisco has is even more powerful than EMC in the storage world. And I think that the networking team, because if you have an outage, it's data center wide, very risk averse, and so people want to make sure that this technology works. And so what we found is almost a Trojan horse is starting the conversation around monitoring. Yeah. And we'll monitor your existing Cisco, and this is kind of an alternative to like a Gigamon or a Nixia. And instead of having a very expensive, sort of proprietary chassis-based approach to doing monitoring, what we can do is go in and take through a tap or span port copies of all of your packets from your Cisco or your production environment, and with an SDN controller, top-of-rack switches, and a DVDK service node, we can deliver all of those features of a really expensive network packet broker for about half the cost. And so it's very compelling for organizations who want to see all of their east-west traffic in virtualized environments are highly, kind of east-west as opposed to north-south. And so we give you that pervasive visibility, and you can then do some packet management, and then we hand that over to your tool farm. So we can actually reduce your tool costs, give you much better visibility, and we're not doing a head-to-head competitive engagement with Cisco off the bat. And this gives organizations time to get used to doing this SDN approach to monitoring. And what we've seen is that often that leads to conversations 6 months later when the networking team is thinking about doing their refresh. Maybe they're thinking about ACI, and that's when they'll bring us in and do a competitive bake-off.
Okay.
And so that's been a kind of nice, repeatable way that Dell, for the last 2.5 years, has started to really take down some pretty nice accounts.
So it's a great stepping stone for companies who have Cisco. They say, you can't pry this Cisco from our cold dead hands today. It's a great way to get used to SDN, learn about it, get exposed to Big Switch and what your capabilities are.
It's a great way to actually get better visibility and for a significantly lower cost.
Yeah.
This is actually interesting because a lot of mid-sized companies usually can't afford a Gigamon or a network packet broker. So for the first time, they're actually getting end-to-end visibility in their network, which really allows them to do better threat reduction and increase their security.
Very nice,
Yeah.
very nice. So, I mean, here at VMworld, I've been learning a lot about software-defined networking. It's a huge topic. Obviously, the ideal use case for Big Switch. If people are out there watching this, they can't visit your booth today, maybe. What do you recommend they do? How do they learn more about Big Switch and get some hands-on, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the nice things that we've done is we've built an online lab, labs.bigswitch.com. Over 6,000 people have actually signed up. And basically, it's based on Ravello, so you can actually
use that. It's very nice. Yeah.
You can spin up your own environment, and you can experience that sort of next-gen, UI. Very intuitive. It takes you through your own labs at your own pace. We also have a community edition free version that you can download, and these are for use cases in VMware environments. Our integration with OpenStack. I didn't mention, but Verizon 2 years ago wanted to build out their next generation NFV platform, talked with 19 different vendors that had an OpenStack plugin, and ended up selecting OpenStack for the orchestrator for Red Hat, Big Switch on Dell, and then rolled that out over the last 2 years to 6 regional data centers and 200 plus racks of production, so very kind of meaty. And we're also seeing a lot of interest in container networking. Okay. So as more and more people in the booth today, I've been amazed at how many conversations we've had about container networking in general, Kubernetes in particular. And so we have customers now who see the value of being able to automate the provisioning of networking very quickly, and keeping up with these very kind of ephemeral containers that you spin them up, they're running for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and then they get decommissioned. It's really helpful to have a network that actually can automatically spin those up and then prune those, and that's exactly what the Big Cloud Fabric does.
Very nice, very nice. So if somebody wants to get started, labs.bigswitch.com. And also your community edition, they can download, they can run it on, let's say, a VM and get a little bit of hands-on experience. Excellent introduction to SDN and Big Switch. Thanks so much for your time today, Greg.
Thanks a lot, David. It's been great.